Hello and welcome to StudyIQ English. I am your friend Rahul Saigaonker, and today we are going to discuss about international relations. Now here we are going to discuss about a topic from international relations called neutrality. In fact, we are going to raise a question that is neutrality really obsolete in 21st century? What is the utility of neutrality in today's global politics? That is the domain of our discussion. You already have a question. So why are we discussing about neutrality all of a sudden? Because recently a very important development has taken place. A new entrant has entered the NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization, that is Finland. Finland has formally joined as the 31st NATO member very recently in April 2023. Now this has brought the question of neutrality to fore. Why? Because Finland had been a neutral country for almost 7 decades. From 1950s till I would say 21st century, Finland had been rather neutral between the USSR, at that time USSR, later on Russia. That means between Russia and the European bloc, Finland was rather neutral. Suddenly, things have changed, and now Finland has shed that neutrality, and this has brought us to the question that whether neutrality has lost its relevance in 21st century. That's the domain of our discussion. We'll try to understand, first of all, what is the meaning of neutrality in terms of international politics. We'll talk about the history of Finland as a neutral nation. We'll also talk about the status of neutrality in the entire European continent. And at the end of the discussion, we'll have an analysis over neutrality. Has it lost relevance? What are the pros of neutrality? What are the cons of neutrality, because of which in 21st century, it is rather losing relevance? That is the agenda of today's discussion. Let's begin our interaction. But before that, there's a small notice for all of you. If you're preparing for UPSC Civil Services Examination, StudyIQ has brought a unique program for you for UPSC Civil Services 2024 Prelims to Interview batch. This is one of a kind of a program where StudyIQ will be with you right from your day one. That means from your prelims till your interview, StudyIQ will be with you. If you clear Prelims 2024, StudyIQ is going to fund your entire mains preparation. Later on, StudyIQ will take care of everything. So this is a long-term program, comprehensive and an integrated program. For maximum discount on this program, do use the code Rahul Live. If you go to our website, you select the program, you select P2I 2024 batch number 2 is starting very soon. In fact, a couple of classes are over, the orientation is over, admissions are still open. Join as soon as possible. So I'll see you in the class. Right, let's talk about neutrality. The first question, sir, what do I understand by neutrality? See, we do know from electricity perspective, there is positive, there is negative, positive phase, negative phase, and there is neutral phase. So neutral means not on the extremes. The same analogy applies for international politics as well. In fact, United Nations has defined neutrality. There is an International Day of Neutrality as well. There is International Day of Neutrality, which is 12th December every year. It's considered as International Day of Neutrality in international politics. Now, neutrality is connected with warring factions. Please try to understand, neutrality in international politics is connected to the concept of war. If there are two parties which are at loggerheads with each other, if there are two belligerent parties, right now the example is Russia and Ukraine. There is Russia and Ukraine, two sides which are fighting with each other. Now, if you do not take anybody's side, if you abstain from taking side, that is the meaning of neutrality. That means abstention from participation in the war and also maintaining the position of impartiality. And that impartiality has to be accepted by the warring factions also. That means do not take any side with the belligerents. The belligerents will also acknowledge that you are a neutral party. That is the meaning of international neutrality. In fact, it is identified by 3 basic attributes according to United Nations. One is preventive diplomacy. That means you use the diplomacy to prevent the war. You mediate between the warring factions, or you mediate between the belligerent parties. And finally, your ultimate intention is to bring peace in the world. So peacemaking is a very important factor in neutrality. I hope you have gained a very good insight into what is the meaning of neutrality. Now let's talk about the news. As I told you, why we are having this entire interaction about neutrality in the 21st century is because of this. Recently, Finland has joined NATO as the 31st ally. In fact, now it is going to be a very interesting scenario for Finland. You know, in Finland, there has been a change in the government. There was left-wing led Sanna Marin, who was the prime minister, but she has lost her majority. Now, the right conservatives have gained the power in Finland. And now it is going to be really interesting because they have formally joined the NATO. And in NATO, every NATO ally has to put in 2% of the GDP, in basically 2% of the contribution towards the NATO for defense spending. Now let's look at what exactly Finland will do, because Finland is already bloated with debt because of the COVID-19 pandemic. So it's going to be really interesting. Will the Western Bloc give some sort of concession for Finland? And Finland formally joined in April after the final ratification by Turkey. Turkey was the last country. You do know that if somebody wants to join NATO, there is a long and elaborate process. And all the members, there were 30 members now, 30 members have to ratify this accession, and then only the country can join. Now Finland has joined formally. Now if you look at Finland, Finland has been a very neutral country right from, I would say, the onset of Cold War. The Finnish people, or the Finnish foreign policy, has been of strict neutrality, because during the Cold War, they did not take the side of USA, they did not take the side of USSR, they remained neutral. And this neutrality was mainly because of an agreement. It's also called YVA agreement. The agreement was signed between Soviet, USSR and the Finnish government. Now, in fact, such agreements were signed by Soviet with many other countries. India was also one of the countries. Say 1971, Soviet Union and India's Treaty of Friendship Cooperation was signed. But with Finland, it was signed way back in 1948 itself. Now here, Finland decided that I am not going to take either side. I am not going to join the NATO. I am not going to join the Warsaw. I am not going to join any of the military blocs. I will remain very, very neutral. And through this agreement, it was able to survive as a liberal democracy, because we do know what happened. What happened? Russians were trying to turn the Eastern European countries and many other countries, many other European countries, into communist nations. Western Bloc was trying to counter the communism. But Finland has remained liberal democracy. It has had decent relations. Now, why Finland agreed? Because of the location. See, Finland had a very peculiar kind of a conundrum, because its headquarters, or its capital Helsinki, was very, very close to St. Petersburg, which was the earlier capital city of Russians or USSR. It later shifted to Moscow, but before, St. Petersburg was the capital city of the Russians, we know, right? So there was a lot of closeness here, and Finland was always threatened that Russians might attack. So they signed a treaty of friendship with the Russians, and ultimately they did not join any bloc. They did not accede to the Marshall Plan. You know, Marshall Plan was a plan of reconstruction for the entire Europe, sanctioned or supported by United States funds. Finland did not join it. Finland had decent relations because it maintained a neutral position, more or less till the end of Cold War, I would say 1992. But since 1992, or in 21st century, things have been continuously changing. Things have been continuously evolving. And now Finnish policy has changed. And there are no prizes for guessing here why it changed, because we all know a very important date. The date is February 24th, 2022. Now, this date is rather unforgettable because for the first time, I would say, in the 21st century, we have seen a war of such a huge scale, which has been going on for more than 1 year. On this date, Russia invaded Ukraine, and after that, the Finnish parliament decided that they are going to join NATO. In fact, in 2022 itself, they released a report about the changes in the security environment and why they want to join NATO. So a decades-old policy, almost 7-decade-old policy of neutrality was changed, and they decided to join the NATO. They applied for NATO formally last year. In fact, they also anticipated that this might irk the Russians, and they started to build their own civil defense. You would not believe that the Finnish were prepared before this decision. They have built underground Helsinki, where if at all the Russians attacked, or if there is some sort of a war or some sort of an apocalypse, then there is underground facility for almost 900,000 people to be housed underground. It's more like a bunker city. You can just see the pictures here. They've already built this in Helsinki, so they are prepared. All right, and now formally they have joined NATO also after the ratification. So a decades-old policy of neutrality has changed. Now the question in front of us is that, is it just Finland? Or if you look at Europe, we do know that there were 30 members in NATO before. Now Finland is 31st member. Are there any other members who are neutral? See, there are just a few members who are neutral. As of now, Sweden, I wouldn't call Sweden particularly neutral because Sweden has also applied to NATO, and very soon Sweden will also join NATO, because the Finnish and the Swedish people almost at the similar time they applied for NATO, and possibly very soon they will join NATO. Apart from that, there are 4 main countries which are or which have been traditionally neutral, I can say. And 2 among them are very important. One is Austria, one is Switzerland. Apart from that, yes, Ireland and Malta are the 2 countries which are neutral, and they have remained neutral. Austria still remains neutral. Switzerland also remains neutral. And out of all these 4 countries, I can say a possibility of someone remaining neutral till the end would be Switzerland, because Switzerland has capability to defend itself. They have invested heavily on their defenses also in terms of high-tech defense. But the other countries, their spending in terms of defense is very, very low. So these are traditional neutral countries as of now. So let's wait and watch what exactly will happen. Will neutrality remain, or will they also accede or join NATO? In fact, these 3 countries, they are already pro-NATO. They have close relations with NATO. So very soon we might see them follow the suit also. But nonetheless, this brings us to our primary question of discussion, that is neutrality feasible in 21st century? See, neutrality has its own benefits. In fact, neutrality as a concept is an age-old concept. If you have read about Kautilya, if you read about Arthashastra, if you read about Kautilya's foreign policy, he talks about neutral countries. In his Mandala theory, he talks about neutral countries. He talks about creating buffer states. He says that if a king wants to enjoy the power, if a king wants to expand his domain, he will need buffer states. He will need neutral states, because buffer states and neutral states will play a very, very important role in perpetuation of his power, right? So buffer state is an example. Neutrality will lead to buffer state or creation of buffer state. Again, they can get benefits from both the countries. And buffer state means they are not aligned with anybody. So they do not have enmity with anybody. What will they do? They do not spend on military expenditure. In fact, if you look at these countries, be it Austria, Ireland or Malta, they have very small spending on their defenses, less than 1%, right? Less than 1% of the GDP goes into defense spending, because they don't want it. And if you are a neutral state, there is always a chance that you can become a center of international mediation, or a player where you can bring some sort of a balance, or some sort of a compromise between the 2 belligerent parties. And I can give you an example here again. Now, if you look at Switzerland, yes, Switzerland being a neutral country, if you look at Geneva is a center of international institutions. If you look at Austria, Vienna is a center of international organizations. If you look at, say, I can say United Nations is centered in US, which is a little eccentric, I would say, or which is a little out of this particular discussion. But nonetheless, if you look at Austria and Switzerland being neutral countries, they have been the center of international organizations. They have been center of many international collaborative, cooperative features, or say what we can say as conventions, protocols and agreements. They have been center of that, isn't it? Yes, they have been. So yes, of course, they act as buffer state. They can get benefits from both the countries. They have to spend very little on military, and they can work as international mediators. So now these are some of the positives of neutrality, and because of which it was quite attractive, at least in the 20th century. But there are many analysts who argue that it has rather lost utility in the 21st century. Why? See, neutrality is sometimes seen as rather unethical. In fact, many people have commented or criticized India over this itself. Henry Kissinger, being one of the prominent diplomat from United States of America, who criticized India, that India being non-aligned or India being neutral is rather unethical. You have to take the sides, or you can be blamed as opportunist, where you take benefits from both the sides. Being a buffer state, what you do is you take benefit from both the parties. Now, I can give an example of our own neighbor Bangladesh. Between the 2 giants, 2 Asian giants, India and China, Bangladesh tries to reap benefit from both the countries, right? So opportunism or being unethical for not taking sides or right sides is some criticism that is accorded towards neutral states. Apart from that, there is always a constant military threat. because you can see a state which is neutral, there is always a danger that it gets sandwiched between two great powers and it might end up as a collateral damage. It has happened many a times. And the most important reason because of which people highlight that neutrality has lost relevance, because every country has to now spend on their own defenses. They cannot rely on some other country, or at least if they do not have ability, then they do have to join some sort of an alliance or some sort of a collective defense model. And that is what Finland has done. Why? Because in 21st century, there is a new kind of warfare that is emerging. Yes, of course, there is conventional warfare through your military means. There is also economic warfare. There is also cyber warfare. There is also space-based warfare. New kinds of warfare techniques are emerging. And in that scenario, being neutral, or one country cannot afford to be neutral. That's one of the arguments. So you do decide. That's the basic analysis where I have given you the pros also and the cons also. You let me know, is neutrality obsolete in 21st century? Let me know in the comment section. Some people believe yes, some people say no, age-old neutrality still works. Of course, age-old neutrality works on the concept of the country's power. The country's power, the country's ability. Smaller the country, being neutral becomes more and more dangerous or precarious for that particular country. The bigger the country, bigger the economic might, bigger the military might, or bigger the hard power, being neutral can be afforded. And that is what happens with India. So do let me know. It's a food for thought question for you. Do you think that Indian foreign policy follows neutrality? Do let me know your thoughts in the comment section. Are we really neutral in the international arena or international global scenario? Do let me know your thoughts in the comment section. Now, if there is any update on this particular thing, say when Sweden joins NATO, we'll have a discussion again. If there is any development or neutrality or anything on neutrality, we can talk about that again. And a question can be formed. Say, for example, what is the relevance of neutrality in the global international political scenario in 21st century? You have to analyze from both the sides. Such questions might emerge in your general studies as well as in your political science and international relations. So this is a very important fodder for you, content for you from that perspective. That's it in this particular discussion. Now, before I go out, do remember, if you want to connect with me, if you have any queries, if you have if you want to follow me, you can follow me on this particular ID @Rahul Sai 222. You can always message me on Instagram. I do respond on Saturdays and Sundays. Thank you for watching this video. Jai Hind.